We are on
Hello,
time, people.
everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to With Unders Applause, a podcast where two friends get together to discuss the events and ideas shaping our uncertain future. I am your host, Steve, along with my co-host, Zach. What is up?
I don't think I've gotten the photography bug yet. I might have mentioned that last time, but I don't feel like this infectious desire to just take pictures of everything around me. I'm trying to get that way.
You know, yeah, I think it's a social media, more recently a social media thing, um because I am that person. Like, people look at my phone and be like, like, oh, you don't have pictures of this? Like, why don't you take pictures of your kids and your
Mm-hmm.
family? And I'm like, because I'm there with them. Why do I need a fucking picture? Like, so I can be like,
Yeah,
oh, remember that time we hung out and now we don't? Or,
yeah, and
remember
I
that
much
one time we
prefer
did something instead of doing that something again? Sorry, go ahead.
I much prefer enjoying the concept of a beautiful sunset or sunrise, and like, yeah, you'll never remember it in the greatest detail as you would if you had taken a picture of it. But
Right.
like, does it actually matter? Like,
Yeah.
your experience of it is more important than the objective experience. I always hate. I never know if I do objective and subjective. I'm going to go with objective and consider that I'm right. The objective experience of the sunrise or sunset.
There is an objective experience of being present. The subjective experience would be like how you perceive that experience. So, like,
Ah,
I think in either case, it's similar. Like, your objective experience is going to be different viewing something only through a photograph than like in person.
yeah,
Because really, like, when you're in person, like, you're not really your mind's not on like the fucking necessarily always on all the details that you can capture in
yeah,
a photo. You're kind of just being there.
yeah. And
Um,
then you also modify your memory every time you draw it up. Um,
mhm.
like everything that we can observe from our doing brain scans says that every time you would draw a memory for analysis, you also open it up for editing, and so like you change it
Yeah,
ever so slightly.
and this is going to be a weird fucking take on it.
Hmm.
But as someone who studied history and has gone through boxes of what it's called in the archival material is called ephemera. Ephemera. It just means like stuff that's not people's writings, but it also like is like kind of like more like found objects. So like a political button or a campaign pamphlet or something might be that, but it's not archival like the previous president's like fucking thoughts on a particular like legal issue, right?
Hmm.
Like ephemera is just like it's there, it might make it into the archive, but it doesn't really like actually contribute directly through the written word as a primary source. It's material that's like has to be subjectively interpreted.
Like
um
diaries and such. Is that a good
That's
example?
primary material, archival
No.
material, yeah. Ephemera is the box where you put all the, like, the miscellaneous stuff, you're not sure where it goes. And anyway, like, photographs are a lot of those. You're like, "Oh, there's a box of photos from somebody whose grandma died in 1970, and then they donated this box of, like, old photos because 'cause they're, like, very early photography wasn't widely available, and they're pictures of, like, the city of Chico, like,
Hmm.
when it was, like, 4 blocks or whatever, you know what I mean? And so that would
Yeah.
go into the archive as ephemera because you don't really have any, provenience data either. You don't
Yeah.
know
Like
when it
no
was taken,
context.
where it was taken, what year,
Hmm.
any of that. You can kind of determine like, oh, this photograph we know through historical sources, usually business records back in the day, just like
Hmm.
list of addresses of businesses. Oh, we used to know that this business opened in this year, so it was prior to that year, right?
Yeah.
um
Or
but
these
it's not, it's
beverages.
yeah, exactly, it's just
Yeah.
stuff that doesn't know where to go. And I think that like most of people's photographs are that way, and they just go to a digital graveyard.
Hmm.
I mean, it's like, why even do it? Like, I can see the art, photography is art of
Yeah.
capturing something and then putting it in a physical form so that it can be enjoyed no matter what happens to servers. Like when MySpace crashed or Facebook decided they didn't want to hold notes anymore, and I lost a bunch of fucking like creative nonfiction and stuff that I had written and then put there, and then carved up as social media posts or whatever. But I had like the core of my ideas and my thinking written there, and they just decided they didn't want to keep the feature anymore because they were finding difficulty commodifying it and making a profit off of that function. So they just got rid of it. And I lose my shit, just like everybody's fucking photos. All it would take is them to be like MySpace and be like, oop, botched server migration. You've lost everything on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And do you keep stuff from phone? Like with iCloud, it's a little different. But most people don't subscribe to a cloud service.
You mean a paid cloud service or a cloud service?
iCloud is a paid service.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, no. Sorry, I didn't know that. And so, yeah, I agree. I don't subscribe to any paid ones because there's so many free ones that you can just kind of
like Google Drive.
Yeah, but then you can distribute it if it gets too big.
Yeah, exactly. And that is an option, but it becomes cumbersome. And most people like the photographs on my phone. When I get a new phone, I never access them again.
Dude, I'm going to tell you this. More than 2/3 of the photographs on your computer were duplicates.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that is a very similar thing to a lot of people is backups of backups, end up making, duplicates of duplicates. And yeah, what you said is true. I was actually talking about this earlier in a photography class, oddly enough, is that, we all take all these photographs of the precious moments in our lives, but like how many of them are just a thing or a place and don't mean anything out of context. And so like if you drop your photograph album, or if you don't properly archive your photographs, you end up with just like, oh, it's some trees in a place, or something like that.
Yeah, and it was a thing, and it still is a thing. Like, my grandma had photo albums, but they were usually put together over the course of a couple years, so it was like a snapshot in time. And at some point you stop making new photo albums. And then you're just like, cool, it's Christmas at grandma's again. We're going to look at those photos she took back in the 1980s.
Yeah.
When like all of her kids were just starting their family, so all the cousins are like 3 years old, and you have nothing after that.
I mean, let's face it. Basically, like as soon as kids are kids, it's like, oh, damn it, I already experienced this part, and it's not the good part.
Yeah.
Like the grandparents are just like, I want them when they're 1 to 3, and like maybe like 14 and up.
Speaking of kids that only get cooler. And parents that are growing into their new relationship as parents.
Omega?
Let's watch a trailer for The Bad Batch. We have a good show. This is Shooting the Poodoo episode 50. We're going to cover The Bad Batch trailer later than everybody else who covers Star Wars, but that's cool because I just want to talk about it and enjoy watching it again. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this border fucking bullshit and the unconstitutional usurpation of federal an explicit federal function, the kind of things that civil wars are made of, just to let you know. Not that Biden would ever do that, and Democrats wouldn't do that. They'd rather just help Israel facilitate its genocide. And then we're going to just do kind of a couple other issues. We talk about climate change a lot, and I came across a very interesting paper. I didn't have a chance to read it thoroughly, but the basic premise, pause please. The basic premise is very interesting. So you're going to learn about that with us. It's about the carbon footprint of urban farming. Additionally, we are going to check in on UBI because there's another series of case studies that have proven successful, and it will set up our Monday episode where we're going to talk about housing. So if you'd like, play that trailer. It is a 2-minute trailer. Do I have that right?
Yes.
I am going to excuse myself momentarily and BRB. Let it roll.
Hold on! We've got troopers up top. We're running out of road!
Not exactly a stealth exit, boys.
Let's move!
I thought that the end of the war would mean an end to losing more of our brothers. But I was wrong. We can't just walk away. Not with the Empire imprisoning the kid.
Secure her in a cell.
Omega's been waiting for us a long time. Our mission is not over yet.
There is nothing of greater importance to secure the future of this empire. Whatever is needed to accomplish this goal, you will have it.
They are coming. For all of you.
Give us a real challenge.
Very low volume.
And they bet
Everyone down!
We're not big on following orders.
I wasn't planning on killing you, but you're making it very tempting.
How, you ask? She died in a Kamek comic book.
What?
A bigger cameo than Cad Bane.
Died on screen or off screen? It's a
Although
big
Cad Bane's
difference.
already been involved in the pursuit of Omega. As well as Fennec Shand. And yeah, actually that's a couple pretty good episodes. A good little 2 or 3 episode arc of the Bad Batch was the Bounty Hunter's Pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a pretty good show. I like the Bad Batch. It's not my favorite of the properties of the animated stuff. Rebels is my favorite of the animated stuff.
Yeah.
And the Clone Wars also really awesome, but I like the Bad Batch. Speaking of which, I was going through old DVDs to get rid of. I have the Tartakovsky, I think his name is, the old animated series. That's on Disney Plus. Speaking of having everything that you love and appreciate in the digital space where it can be taken away or lost.
Well, I'm absolutely not stealing that.
Do you want the hard copy?
No. I really don't.
I am probably going to take it to one of the comic book shops or game stores and see if I can consign it.
Yeah.
Because somebody's going to want a hard copy of that because it's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Or I can just give it to the library if the library doesn't have a copy.
They might not even take it.
They take DVDs.
Oh, no,
They
no,
don't
I don't
put them
mean-
all in the collection.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they basically have a vault as well.
So anyway, your thoughts. We need to kind of speed through it because we got a bunch to cover, but
Oh, that's great. Because I don't even remember much from the previous seasons and didn't watch them like leading up to this. So for me, I'm not too attached to any of the characters.
you haven't seen the previous 2 seasons?
No, I've seen them. It's just been so long, and I don't know. They didn't like hit me hard or anything like that.
Yeah.
Much-
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
not like a Mortis arc or something where you're like, oh shit, this is fucking crazy.
I mean, even the Mortis arc for me is like crazy, but of questionable, like what the hell were the writers doing? AKA canonicity. I don't know. Sometimes it's just like, how high on drugs were you? And if you weren't high on drugs, what is the point of all this? And please just get to it quick, because I don't need like a 20-year reveal of your ultimate guide to what the Force is. As the more they like hammer in on what the Force is, the less I like it.
Oh shit, then you're gonna hate it because they're making a whole fucking movie about it.
Oh, great. Which one's that?
At least they've announced it, but they've announced a lot of movies that never got made, so maybe it'll
That's
never
true.
get made. But they announced one by James Mangold, who I don't know who that is. I think he ran an animation, like he did like Into the Spider-Verse, I think, or something. Maybe I'm confusing people. Which was an animated
I'll never
thing.
look it up. You're good.
No, you're good. It's not important, but yeah, they're supposed to do a movie about the origin of the Force, and then they're going to do one with like Daisy Ridley doing like rebuilding the Jedi Order because fucking, of course, Luke Skywalker failed. Which doesn't really bother me as much as it bothers some people. Yeah, so anyway, those are supposed to tie together. You're supposed to have the very early origins of the Force and then that coming back with all the books that Luke had done as a sage, basically, when he went into just studying about the Force and stuff.
See, of
It's
course,
just
in
trying to teach
hindsight,
people.
everything is 2020, and so it's like if you wanted to have the Force, reborn or whatever, you absolutely could have had Luke Skywalker training people and then done a movie where it was him and actually introduced like Kylo Ren as someone you cared about. When he was like Ben Solo, had that be the first movie, like get you invested before you like exposition dump things. Instead, they were just like exposition dump, and you're supposed to care about these characters. And it's like, well, I don't, because you didn't put in the effort to gain my emotional investment.
Well, and you teach him about his origin by him like praying to a melted face of Darth Vader. It's fucking weird. We don't need to talk about that. We're talking about the Bad Batch. I'm interested because like the Bad Batch has been building up to, it's been kind of seeding what happened to the cloning program. And the Bad Batch is basically these 3 seasons, because this is the last season, have been setting up that how Palpatine return line, right? Like
somehow
Palpatine return line, right? Like and all the trying to clone Force sensitives and stuff. And that's some of what was going on in Mandalorian, right? Like he's doing this ongoing project, and so this is just part of it. It just shows that they've been doing it for years, trying to like basically put the Force into clones. And I think that's what this is ultimately setting up, because they showed them destroy Camino, destroy all the evidence of that, and then they took that cloning technology and put it in Imperial hands.
Basically. Well, I would say at that point, the clones have outlived their usefulness, and so of course they're trying to exterminate them. They're all liabilities. Like they are liable to hold a grudge, because they were engineered with shorter lives, basically only used as tools, and so on and so forth. Like the more time that goes by, the more obvious it's going to be for most of the clones, no matter what programming they have.
Yeah, and I think the Bad Batch has also done a really good job showing that kind of transition into the Imperial Stormtrooper, and showing what has been happening to the clones. There was that arc where in the Bad Batch where a character that was introduced in the Clone Wars, Senator Chuchi from I forget the name of their planet. It's an ice planet, but Pandora, I think they call it. Pantora, sorry. Anyway,
so original now.
yeah. And she was trying to pass some bill. There was an episode of them trying to basically a pension, right? And it's so there's little elements peppered in, I think, that kind of add to the lore of the universe that I really appreciate. Some more explicit than others. And I think that's valuable. And I think that it'd be really great to end on a 3rd season that kind of like just, okay, cool. You now have seen the transition. Now we set up what we call the Imperial era, right? Then that exists for 10 or years or so before like Rebels and the stuff that we see in both Rebels and we're seeing in Andor with the birth of the rebellion, or the consolidation of all the resistance cells into a centralized organization. Speaking of centralized organizations, we're going to talk about the fucking United States government and its fucking constitutional authority over the border, but we're going to do that after. What's next on the docket? You want to talk about carbon footprint of urban farms?
Yeah, man. Because you think it's great, but it ain't in all instances. In some, it's better though, so that's good.
Yeah. So I saw this headline because like I'm one of those dummies that like scrolls through, like I open Chrome and I just scroll through the articles that like come up. That's in fact how I get a lot of my news, which is cool because a lot of it, my algorithm for whatever reason is feeding me like a lot of anthropology. Probably because I fucking talk about collapse all the time. And so and talk about like just the human condition and what history, especially ancient history, can tell us about like the human condition when resources were not as plentiful and institutions were much more immature, because it all comes on a wave, right? We're just riding the wave, baby. And it's a similar pattern. It never repeats itself to the detail, but there's a general pattern that we can determine from history. And part of the project of this podcast is to talk about where we are in that cycle, in that, and what the pattern can provide us to help us make sense of it and hopefully like remain sane. Because I think we're about to descend into a lot of insanity, a lot of conflict, and we're seeing the signs everywhere already, because that worldview that has been implanted in us doesn't actually it fails to actually explain the world as it exists around us. So
I, for one, hope that when Washington burns, the president plays an electric guitar. But that's just me. I'm a simple man with simple needs.
Excellent. Okay, so I saw this because we've talked, actually one of our very first episodes of the podcast. Again, another central theme of the show is that most green stuff. I consider myself a deep ecologist, like in most senses of the word. I'm very committed to the liberation of the planet from our oppressive industrial civilization. But I'm also a rational being who can look at facts and also like look at the energy in things and look at how something exists within a system and question it and question things that are often presented as, a priori good things.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those things is urban farming. It's certainly in the Green Party's platform to have urban farms everywhere. And we have talked here, I believe we've talked about the metabolic rift. And I'm a firm believer that we should have like neighborhood composting, and that people should grow more food themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as it being a commercial enterprise, it's not viable.
No. Nor should it be.
Right. Food from urban agriculture has a carbon footprint 6 times larger than conventional produce.
Asterisk.
Big asterisk.
Uh,
University of Michigan-led international study finds that fruits and veggies grown in urban farms and gardens have a carbon footprint that is on average 6 times greater than conventionally grown produce. Few city-grown crops equaled or outperformed their conventional corollaries. Tomatoes grown in the soil of open-air urban plots had a lower carbon intensity than tomatoes grown in conventional greenhouses, while the emission difference between conventional and urban agriculture vanished for air-freighted crops like asparagus. So let's reread that. The emissions difference vanished. So urban agriculture is like urban agriculture asparagus has the same carbon footprint of air freighted asparagus. Is that how you're reading that?
I'm reading it that certain crops grow well in certain areas, and that if you are in an area that can grow asparagus, shipping asparagus from somewhere else doesn't make sense.
Right. The exceptions revealed by our study suggest that urban agriculture practitioners can reduce their climate impacts by cultivating crops that are typically greenhouse grown or air freighted. So that makes sense. And that's saying let's target urban agriculture, not towards like something that's grown on a farm in the region and then trucked in, but actually grow something that's sold in the city that comes from really far away.
Yeah. And of course, when you're talking about very small plots, you also don't want to try to grow anything that takes up a lot of space.
Right, like trees. But again, I just think that more urban public spaces should have that integrated into other uses. Like I think that a public square where people can sit down in the shade and talk, or buskers can come hang out, or kids can skateboard and shit, should also have fruit trees. Mm-hmm. And also habitat trees, right? Native habitat trees. Mm-hmm. So the exceptions reveal they can reduce by doing those things. Scroll down. Urban agriculture offers a variety of social, nutritional, and place-based environmental benefits, which make it an appealing feature of sustainable future cities. And so urban agriculture, the practice of farming within a city is becoming popular worldwide and is touted as a way to make cities and urban food systems more sustainable. But some estimates between 20 and 30 of the global urban population engages in some form of agriculture, which is also awesome to point out that we're like, oh, look, it's hip and trendy. And like, oh, look at how these poor minorities in these ghettos have like started to transform their life and the lives of the people in their neighborhood through urban farming, right? Like there's always some kind of like nonprofit fucking fund chasing kind of narrative behind it. And the reality is that like in the global south, people fucking grow their own food. They have to. I mean, Cuba is a fucking phenomenal example. Like Cuba has a very functional, like urban, like legit farms, like several acres just plugged into different parts of the city. And then little pocket gardens too. That used to be a house that, fell apart and no one bought the land. So that the neighborhood came together and like
I mean, they
restructured
had
it into
to.
like a little garden. And then somebody hustles and sells flowers out of it or something like that, right?
Well, they had to because they were just introduced to, highly industrialized agriculture, and then had the
Oil
imports.
taken away.
Oh yeah, basically the oil economy taken away, no more imports, and et cetera, and they had to go back to older forms of farming.
100%. All right, cool. Despite strong evidence of the social nutritional benefits, which are important and worth considering if you're going to implement these programs, its carbon footprint remains understudied. Even though it's talked about like reducing food miles, which I'm a firm believer in reducing food miles. That's why I got lettuce and broccoli and shit in my garden. Most previously published studies focused on high-tech, energy-intensive forms of urban agriculture, even though the vast majority of urban farms are decidedly low-tech. And so, yeah, it's easy. We've talked about vertical farming here and all that shit. It's like, yeah, all those materials come from somewhere and take energy. Like, so you're not like, oh, we don't need fucking soil or any of that. We can just grow these vertical farms in the middle of cities and it's great.
I was
It's just
talking
snake
about
oil if they're trying to sell investors. Sorry, go ahead.
I was recently talking about like how things would continue with a collapse of like very easy transport in between regions.
Yeah.
And when things typically seen as waste today are seen as viable like assets in the future. And I was wondering if I could actually provide nutrients into the soil if I didn't have outside influences, if I didn't have banana peels for potassium and stuff like that, like waste that came from far away. Like, would I actually be able to enrich my local soil with just local crops?
Yes.
Oh,
fucking pigeons, bro. No, I'm
birds and
serious. You
shit.
build a dovecote and you just keep fucking pigeons. It's just
Yeah.
genius. And then you can eat them and they produce poop and they go out and eat all the shit that you did that you don't own and that is just out there not being used. I mean, it has an impact, right? Like it's the pigeons are taking food from something else, but it's pretty low key. It's pretty low energy, low time, right? Low labor.
Oh yeah,
Once
like worse
you
happens
invest in
you
the
lose
capital,
some,
it's just maintaining it.
Yeah, like somebody else might shoot one of your birds, but oh well, you got more.
And they're gonna die. They're gonna get eaten by cats or whatever else. Like, and guess what? They still fucking breed well enough for you to harvest them, and they go and they fucking produce massive piles of shit. And remember, wars were fought over fucking
bird shit,
islands of bird shit. Like quite literally, wars were fought over islands of bird shit. Before the Haber-Bosch process, before we developed synthetic fertilizer from natural gas, essentially,
we killed over bird shit.
Yeah, we killed each other over fucking bird poop. Fucking wild, man. So anyway, the study was published in the journal Nature Cities and aimed to fill some of the knowledge gaps by comparing the carbon footprints of food produced at low-tech agriculture sites to conventional crops, and it used data from 73 urban farms and gardens in 5 countries, and it's the largest published study to compare the carbon footprints of urban and conventional agriculture, which is awesome. So it's approaching that meta study, right? It's like looking at all these other studies of it, collating the data and trying to determine a pattern. And that is, if you wondered why I said that, is I'm gearing up to teach a permaculture class again, And one of the concepts I brought up is like the hierarchy of knowledge, and how like in the scientific process, like the meta-analysis is always like there's very few of them that get done, but they're like pretty definitive as far as it goes, because that's where everything gets channeled into like a point. The singularity, man. For
Analyzing the data of the data.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For each site, the researchers calculated climate-altering greenhouse emissions associated with on-farm materials and activities over the life of the farm, emissions expressed in kilograms carbon dioxide equivalent per serving of food. So they basically distributed the carbon cost across a unit of food, like a basket of vegetables or whatever.
On chaff of wheat.
Yeah.
Etc.
Oh, you scrolled all the way out.
Oh, that was it. That was the end.
Oh, great. So anyway, check that article out. And so far, it's obvious that like, and I mean, is that not like obvious? We're gonna do the Attorney General before the breaking points. Thank you. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. What are your quick thoughts on that? Because we were like way out of time.
We are way over time. I mean, it makes sense. Basically, like if you compare some of the more resource intensive things that require, like, say for example, you're in an area where you can easily grow, fall to spring crops. Your climate is primarily in that region. You'd be a fool to focus on tropical things. And so it makes sense to me when they say like, oh, they're like, it's in Detroit. Right in the title, it says that it's in Detroit, Michigan. So they're saying that like, conventional and urban agriculture differences vanished with air freighted crops like asparagus. Well, asparagus also grows really well in colder climates. So that makes really
not
good
Michigan
sense.
cold.
That's true. They're probably going to have to put up, like hoops and stuff like that in order to keep everything warm. But they can grow it, like that's not a really big input, just putting up like plastic hoops. And so it makes sense to me that if you're trying to grow crazy things that aren't where you're supposed to grow, it's going to be more intensive than if you grow climate specific crops. And fortunately, tomatoes, which are delicious and make pizza whole, grow almost everywhere, as long as you're not like frozen most of the year. So everything makes sense to me. Checks out.
Yeah. Check the tracker real quick. Because that's the next one that has to go up. Yeah, I just think it's interesting because like oftentimes they try and sell us that like urban agriculture is like this fix for climate change, and it absolutely needs to be. We need to produce food closer to where we eat it, but I think you're right. Like, it's not going to be a fix for everywhere. Just like, water-wise landscaping isn't going to be a fix to water issues in California. It'd go a really long way, right? But as long as we're commodity agriculture driven, we're going to deplete our resources. I've been thinking about writing a letter to the editor about fucking titled "Our Future is Fresno." No offense, but our future is Fresno because they passed the Tuscan Aquifer management plan, so everybody's paying to basically like, and part of that management plan was like allowing them to draw way down below where the oaks can get it, so it's going to cause massive tree die off. And so like that's what happened in Fresno, right? So it's just that like, there's all these issues with how we manage natural resources and farming in cities. I think like urban gardens for the social benefits, for the exercise or whatever, for the educational benefits, so kids know where their food comes from, that kind of shit is invaluable. Also, you have to look at land use, right? If we actually had a program of smart democratic land use, then like urban farms would be a terrible trade-off, because you're never going to reduce your emissions that much by growing an acre of vegetables. But if you could build an apartment complex, like an apartment building on an acre that houses 100 families or whatever, that can live near where they work, right? and provide them a dignified existence, like that is far more valuable than some vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on to the next thing.
Conservative Supreme Court justices consider weakening federal agency power.
I'm going to step away real quick.
Okay. 40 years ago, the Supreme Court set a precedent that over the years has become a bugbear. Ooh, that's a nice D&T term. On the right, because it is viewed as bolstering the power of federal agencies, and it comes under tough scrutiny as current justices consider whether to overturn it. The court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority, skeptical of broad assertions of federal agency authority, heard two related cases involving fisheries regulations that call into question whether the 1984 ruling in Chevron versus National Resources Defense Council should be consigned to history. Some conservative members of the court appear to be leaning towards overturning the precedent. It is undetermined as to whether they have majority to do so. The court could also take a different approach and place new limits on when lower court judges can defer to agencies without overturning Chevron. At the time it was decided, back in the 80s, Chevron was a win for the deregulatory efforts of the Reagan administration, with the court ruling that judges should defer to federal agencies in interpreting the law when the language is ambiguous. The EPA at the time moved forward with the Clean Air Act that was favorable, with a Clean Air Act that was favorable to polluting facilities, much to the displeasure of environmental groups at the time. The EPA was led by Ann Gorsuch. Yeah, that doesn't matter. She's been an outspoken critic of the Chevron ruling. Let's see. Justice Brett Kavanaugh asked why the Chevron precedent should get the normal respect that long-standing rulings do, questioning the precedent on the grounds that it does not promote stability in the law because it allows agencies to constantly change positions depending on who is in charge. That's every law ever. That's how NASA's budget works. Every NASA shirt that you see is a slap in the face of the American people, because NASA should have been funded by NASA t-shirts. We would have made more by now. The reality of how this works is Chevron itself ushers in shocks to the system every 4 to 8 years when a new administration comes in. Let's see. How the court rules is likely to rest on how Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett vote.
I think you might have scrolled past one of the more important elements of that.
Oh, please do.
Which is Elena Kagan giving practical examples of when it might be better for the courts to defer to an agency's expertise, such as whether a cholesterol-lowering product should be classified as a dietary supplement or a drug. Sometimes the law runs out. Sometimes there's a gap. Sometimes there's a genuine ambiguity, she said. So that presents what we can discuss right now and call this clip good. Come back, Talking Bay.
Gotcha.
And that's the fundamental conflict, right? Is should federal agencies be able to like adjudicate the rules as they have been doing, right? Mm-hmm. As you just said, like it's good that like federal agencies can interpret the law, right? And that's what that's what the court system, the judicial branch is meant to do, in my opinion, is to be a check on that and be like, oh, an administrative case where they're like, oh, this agency, we think this agency is interpreting the law wrong, incorrectly, right? And then they take it to an administrative judge and they hash it out. Lawyers from both sides hash it out and say, this is our position, blah, blah, blah. And the judge makes a determination, right? And if that determination is still like not that strong, then they appeal to a higher court. And then it would be the Supreme Court's decision to make a ruling in that particular case of the minutia. But like, I think what Justice Kagan was saying in this article, or is quoted as saying, I think is absolutely 100% true. I don't think that the law provides for every instance. And so then there is essentially like, if we did, it's a Do, does this come across to you, Zach, as a kind of essentially a conflict between a rules as intended versus a rules as written, to put it in like D&D terms?
I would say it comes down to a rule of someone has a higher check modifier, and we're taking the guy who's got a really low check modifier but has a bardic inspirations word that something is a good idea. It just seems how we run our government entirely is just based off of like, oh, this guy's really inspiring. I'm going to listen to him. Damn the experts.
Oh, that, I mean, is relevant to the article we just read, though.
No, as relevant.
The central argument is we should go by rules as written because we want to try and remove federal government from like the political process, essentially, right? And strip the political power of the president through, which I'm all for. I don't think we should have an executive with as much power as it does have, right? I would also like to have a lot more democracy. I'd like to elect the person who's in charge of the EPA. Right. But then again, people are idiots and no one's going to pay attention to that. And they'd probably elect a fucking monster anyway.
Oh, yeah.
It certainly wouldn't be Captain Planet.
No.
But in the rules as intended is the Justice Kagan position where it's like, hey, the administrative bureaucracy's function is to take what the legislature in terms of constitutional powers. Right. Which will set up when we talk about the border thing, because we're not going to get to it today.
No, we're not.
So it's just a discussion of like the roles of the different branches of government. If the American system is based on a two-house legislative,
right,
a judicial and an executive, the administrative bureaucracy, which falls within the purview of the executive through appointments, right, is meant there to interpret the law of the legislature and implement its function is to implement the law of the legislature, and the judicial branch is to make sure that functions properly, right? So I don't know. I think in the rules as written category, it just like there's too many variables. Like it just gets too chunky, and then it's just you bog it down in endless fucking debating of rules, which would be endless court cases, right?
Yeah.
And that is ultimately going to be exploited by those with more money. And that's a fucking problem because the people with more money, the companies with more money, will spend more on fucking lawyers and tying things up in court to get their way instead of like having an enforcement action from an administrative bureaucrat from, say, for example, the EPA to say, Congress said they want this. This is what you're doing, and we interpret that to be in violation of the law. Here is an administrative fucking cease and desist order or whatever, right? Like instead of having that system, it would rely entirely on the government or private parties suing corporations for doing bad things, because you would have no rules making body to say it's bad. That's kind of how I'm reading it. What do you think?
I didn't write down my thoughts, and now they're erased, so it's fine.
Did I erase your thoughts?
You did.
No. That's
you stomped all over. It's fine, though.
No, it was a last minute shuffle. It was not intentional.
It was. No, I just often need to write down things when I'm talking in real time, which is why I hate conversations that are real time without like a notes app.
I see.
I'm a terrible conversationalist, man. It takes me like 3 minutes to get to what someone is talking about live, which is the traditional problem I think with a lot of people. Is like that's how flim flam artists thrive. Is they just talk so fast you never get a chance to.
That's how Ben
analyze what you're saying. Exactly. You just talk so fast that no one gets a chance to analyze what you're actually saying until long after the ramifications of what you said have.
Yeah, it's a logical fallacy called a gish gallop or gish gallop. I always called it a gallop, but I think it's gallop.
A gish in D&D is someone who has both casting skills and sword skills.
Oh, you mean like a fucking necromancer with a mistwalker?
Exactly.
No, you're going to be the necromancer. And I have a great idea. We'll talk about it offline. A phenomenal idea.
Play Valheim with us. We stream live on Twitch. We don't.
We don't.
We
We should
should.
stream live on
We should.
Twitch, though.
Yeah, it'd probably get us
Really
more
should.
attention.
Yeah, we probably would get more attention than we do here.
Drive
And then we can just propagandize people low key.
drive traffic over here.
I do think this is kind of a rules as written versus rules as intended. And
I
like,
agree.
I've always been a rules as intended person. That is why.
Oh,
I
okay. Wait,
think
no,
Final-
stop. Okay.
Fantasy Flight is superior as a rule system to. Go ahead. You got something to say.
You've already erased it, man. Rules as written as opposed to rules. Okay, so the laws need to be written like with obviously a very stern wording, yet not obviously a very stern wording. So many laws are so open to interpretation. And that's why when laws are written, it needs to be like, this is the best language we had legally to describe it. Here's an addendum that explains philosophically what the law means when we wrote it, so that you don't have to debate as written and as intended. Here is the as intended. Here's the best we could do as written. Because the thing is, so many laws get circumvented and such because we focus too much on as written. And it's like, cool. It's so unfortunate we don't have documents to show the intention of what the writers of the law had in mind. Because that would make all the difference.
We have proceedings.
Yeah. But they're not part of the legal document that you can call upon as precedent.
It is when you appeal, right? Like, so here we're debating this, and then a good lawyer would bring in, because anytime something comes to a Supreme Court case, especially, is where you see it the most.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what did the framers say? Like, what were they debating? What were they arguing in written word? Like, so, like, what ideas were being exchanged? I mean, law is really fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have the patience to go to law school, to be completely honest. And I'm really not like driven to do it. I'm not driven to do anything, but like exist and survive.
There with you, brother. Exist and enjoy the life we're given before it's taken away in some fashion.
Yeah. If you're watching this podcast still and you have any ideas, did you play the music?
Mm-mm.
If you have any ideas of tools, perhaps, that we can use to stay better organized so that we can communicate more effectively regarding this for people whose brains aren't wired for organizing. I mean, I can do organizing, political organizing, but organizing podcasts is way different. There's an app for ADHD.
I don't write
like Goblin something or other.
I'm realizing as we do this that like I'm not prone to basically writing things out in an organized fashion, chapters, etc. Like I basically come up with ideas that are incongruent and cram them in where I can. It's not great writing.
No, it takes practice. I feel like I'm able to shoot off the cuff just because like I've been doing this exercise for so much for just such a long time.
Yeah.
That like I'm pretty fairly easy to go, and I didn't honestly get all that high before because it was like go. I actually have a window open right now to keep the temperature cool in here. Because I was like, get the trash ready, and I had to run and get beer and laundry soap to wash this fucking sweet ass fucking $250 ski jacket that was just hanging in a bush. And we walked by it not once, not twice, but 3 times. Well, we didn't walk by it 3 times. The 3rd time we were walking by it, I pulled it off the bush and took it home.
Thrice. The 3rd time, I took it home because I'm like, obviously no one's coming back for this jacket, because I think it was over a weekend too. So like, there was a couple days we didn't walk that passed that we did not walk by it, but we walked by it because we have a pretty decent 4 mile loop. And in fact, I walked so many miles today, my fucking hips hurt. Yeah. And so I looked it up and it was like, oh yeah, like it's really good to walk, but you can't walk like a lot every single day. And I was like, oh, maybe especially not right off the bat. I fucking hurt. So we just kind of took a day off. Yeah. I mean, I still got some steps in. I, walking around grocery stores and shit, but I didn't like push because I think we walked probably like 30 miles since this time last week. Damn, dude. That's possibly way more. Dude, we're doing like 6, 7, 5, 6,
7 miles a day.
How many hours is that? I don't know distances. I just need to know how much time.
Also, when you have a pedometer, you're counting all your steps. So, like,
Yeah.
if I get out of the car and walk to the fucking kid's classroom and walk back,
Yeah.
like, that's a bunch of steps.
Yeah.
But on our regular walks, usually 4 to 5, 3 to 5, but usually landing somewhere close to 4.
1,000 steps or
No, miles, which is like 10,000 steps.
Okay. Oh,
8
yes.
to 10,000 steps.
Yes, that's a good point. Okay. Yeah, and that's what I was looking for. Yeah. We get to like 9,000 or so. Anyway, with thunderous applause.
Yeah, when Liberty dies, it dies by broken hips from walking too much.
Yeah, because you're old and your body's falling apart. Your body's falling apart. Yay! Cue that Baby Yoda to make us forget all about the fact that our bodies are falling apart. Baby Yoda.